There's that. Uh, and then,
One of those is audio and one is video.
yep,
The blue one is video.
that one's video and that one's audio.
Okay.
High tech stuff.
It looks beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you. I try to keep it simple. Try to.
Well, they are getting simpler and more powerful and cheaper, right?
If you stay before 2000, the year 2000, yeah.
And then after that,
More expensive, more complicated.
really,
Yeah, and less.
stay away from the more complicated, more expensive.
I know, that's why I'm hanging out with you.
Yeah. No, really, there was terrific stuff in the 90s.
No, I know. I mean, this is like probably a 90s camera.
Yeah,
Um,
it had everything, didn't it?
mhm.
Yeah.
It has, well, the great thing about it is that it has buttons. I'm really into buttons. Not a lot of things have buttons anymore. It's all just.
Oh yeah, yeah, I got you. Okay.
Let's see. For a fun way to start, why don't you state your name, height, weight, age, and vocation, just so people know who you are.
We'll come to that later when I can think of the answer. Yeah. Okay.
That's funny. All right.
No, I can do that.
Okay.
George Moore. 5 feet 5 inches
And shrinking.
and shrinking. 135 pounds. Born December 19th, 1932.
1932. Vocation?
No vocation anymore. I don't. Do I have a vocation anymore?
Oh, currently unemployed. That's fine.
Unemployed. Yeah.
Great. The first of three questions I was going to ask is what are the main questions on your mind right now? Or what are questions that are occurring to you, themes, general observations, anything like that?
Well, now I would have to say my surprise and astonishment at the way the world has turned out, the pace with which it is changing, and how radically different it was from memories 10, 20, 30 years ago, to say nothing of how different it is now from when I was a child in the 1930s.
Hmm.
It's just a different world now. And I'm having a lot of trouble keeping up with it. And I know, no, the big difference is I no longer feel I understand the world. Earlier, I thought I understand the world. I was wrong, but at least I believed that. If I said I understand the world now, I'd not only be wrong, but I wouldn't believe it either. That's a big change. For people of my generation and who consider themselves at least borderline intellectuals, that's an astonishing confession.
Hmm.
I don't understand the world anymore.
Hmm. Do you remember around when you stopped?
Well, it would have been certainly recently, in the last 10 years, for sure, that I stopped thinking I understood the world.
Hmm. And believing it.
Yeah, I didn't believe I understood the world. Or I'm not even sure I thought it was understandable, that it could be understood. I always thought there was an ultimate truth. If you just worked hard enough and thought hard enough and talked to enough people, you would discover the truth. But now I don't know who to ask anymore. I'm not sure anybody knows what's happening anymore.
Hmm.
And I see this confirmed every night on the news, every day in the newspaper, every day in ordinary conversation. People don't even want to talk about it because it's so puzzling and changing so rapidly. The sense of time has changed radically.
Is the kind of miscomprehension that you're talking about now what motivates your study of the brain?
The study of the brain now is has led me to conclusions that are a complete surprise to me and remind me that although I once thought I understood the brain, I never had a clue. My understanding of the brain was hopelessly naive, and it was shared in its hopeless naivete by everybody in brain science that I knew. They were all wrong.
Or
That's that's too large a claim, and I'm sorry to make it, but I think I've been led there by my studies in the last couple of years.
Hmm. Earlier we were talking about the essay that you're writing about your UCLA interview. Your first UCLA lecture.
Yes.
Can you set the scene and say why that lecture in particular is a sore thumb in your mind?
Yes. I had been a kind of a half-assed student all my life, and then eventually at UCLA, I got a PhD in brain physiology. And so I had started UCLA as a pre-med, gone to one class, and been so frightened and intimidated by the other pre-med students that I changed my major the next day.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't going to be a pre-med. No, that was a death trap. So my first lecture at UCLA was to the medical school freshmen. And they were all pre-meds who had graduated and now were first-year medical students. And I was lecturing to them.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't imagine a more frightening audience. And of course, part of my fantasy was that they knew much more than I did. They all knew it already because they had read the book. They had read whatever it was. I had taken the same course a couple of years earlier as a graduate student, and now I was giving the first lectures in the same class.
Mm-hmm.
And the lecture was about a phenomenon known as the nerve impulse.
Mm-hmm.
That's a particular electrical signal that nerve cells generate. And these have been part of my PhD thesis, so I knew something about that. And I could read the material in the book as the students in my class. This was a whole auditorium full of pre-meds. Nothing more daunting than that.
Uh-huh.
Frightening. And I didn't realize that the material I was going to present had changed radically in the last few years because of research that had been done less than 10 years earlier in Cambridge, where two Cambridge electrophysiologists studying the squid giant axon had figured out how nerve cells generate this famous action potential. I hadn't read this material, but the textbooks had picked up a little bit on this, and their figures illustrating what happened during the nerve impulse were in the student's textbook.
Mm.
So basically what I was going to do was lecture to the students about the material we all had from the same textbook. Are you with me?
With ya.
And of course, I realized if they know anything more than that and ask me a question about it, I'm dead.
Yeah.
So what I didn't realize was that the reason I was teaching this course was because the faculty in the department knew that the whole field of study of the nerve impulse had changed radically in the last few years. And they knew that I had studied nerve impulses in my PhD thesis. But they also knew that I was a math major, and this major study from Cambridge that led to a Nobel Prize a few years after my lectures had a very heavily mathematical part. So I think they chose me to give these lectures because nobody in the department understood what this new research had done, because it had mathematics. And nobody in those days in biology knew any mathematics. Well, the pre-meds probably didn't either. They probably didn't know what the figures in the textbook, which we all had, they didn't know that it had been derived from this earlier work in Cambridge. And what they didn't know, and what I didn't fully appreciate then, was that textbooks were not full of experimental results, as you would expect. The textbooks their figures were all based on the solutions to the equations describing the nerve impulse. And I had never read those papers, so I didn't understand what they had done. The students hadn't read those papers, they couldn't know. So, contrary to my belief that they all knew more than me, they didn't know any more than I did. And nobody in the department did. And the funny part of it is that every physiology department in the medical school in the whole country had lecturers on the nerve impulse who didn't understand what they were lecturing about. It wasn't just me. Nobody understood it. And I didn't realize that until decades later.
What'd you realize?
I realized recently that I didn't understand the material, and nobody else teaching that material anywhere in any medical school understood it either. We were all flying blind because of this mathematical part, which my chairman thought I would understand. But I hadn't even read it. If I had read it, would I have understood it? No. I still wouldn't have understood it because they were talking about solutions to equations, and those solutions were what appeared in the book. That was what we were teaching them. But the students didn't know that these are not experimental results, these are computational results. And that the results that we were seeing had been calculated over a period of weeks by one man who did it all by hand. Well, I wouldn't have a computer to verify this for another 20 or 30 years. So I couldn't study those equations on my own until many decades later. And only then would I begin to get an understanding of this work that had been so prodigious and so sophisticated that it won the Nobel Prize in the 1960s.
Mhm.
And it still isn't understood. It's still beyond the understanding of most neurophysiologists. A few now understand it, but not at that time, not for decades, because the personal computer hadn't been invented until 30 years later. All the computers were massive, and you couldn't get time on those to verify what Hodgkin and Huxley had published in 1952. So this is the funny part of the story, was that every department in the country was faced with this dilemma. Who are we going to get to teach this material when nobody understands it?
Mhm.
I think that's very funny.
Yeah, no, it is comedic. And I was wondering, like, in addition to it being comedic, it's also a bit paradoxical, right? Just because, um, I suppose, how do you account for progress in the face of incomprehension within any field? Like, at once, uh, people are making advances in neuroscience and other types of science, yada yada. Uh, while how you characterize the general state of enlightenment of most of the people participating in those fields are relatively lower than the caliber of the thing that they're studying. So how do you?
Well, that's an interesting paradox, because a year after the work that I was discussing, Watson and Crick discovered the double helix as the basis of hereditary transmission, and nobody understood that either.
Mhm.
So it took decades for the significance of the Watson and Crick work and the Hodgkin-Huxley work to be appreciated for what it was. These were the two most important papers in biology in the 20th century.
Mhm.
And when they came out, the biologists understood the Watson and Crick results because it was visualizable in terms of a double helix, but that was just the beginning. It's still being exploited for its vastly more complicated implications, and the work that I was teaching was vastly more complicated, but these were the two breakthrough papers, and it was my fate in my first lecture to be chosen to talk about this, which I hadn't read or understood.
Mhm. Well, after recognizing how little that you knew during your first lecture, what, 30 years after? 40 years, did you say?
I told you, it took me a long time to learn the material that I was teaching, and even longer to figure out how to teach.
Yeah. Um,
These were both not available to me on day one.
yeah.
I was a complete novice.
Hmm. How would you characterize um, what you're trying to figure out today on that subject?
I'm still struggling with questions about the brain. The most common question about the brain is, how does it work?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody knows the answer to that. It's not even a proper question. There is no answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
It can't be formulated. And I don't think, let me put it this way, I don't think there's anybody that can tell you what any part of the brain or the brain as a whole has as its function,
Hmm.
not any part. And yet we're expected to teach that.
Hmm.
The function of the cerebellum is this. The function of the hippocampus is that. The function of the motor cortex is this. And it's just baloney. We don't know.
What would a proper question about the brain sound like? Or what kind of elements would it feature?
The proper question would be, what is holding back progress in our understanding of the brain?
Hmm.
Why do brain scientists claim so much success and progress when in fact I'm claiming they don't have it, they can't show it, they don't understand it. They're wasting our time and money. That's the question I'm asking.
Hmm. See, do you have any like main uh, studies that you referred to as like kind of symbolic of the big misleading going on in neuroscience? Or why are you, or what makes you feel so confident about that?
Well, uh, about a year ago, I wanted to write a chapter about how we speak, how your voice issues words with sound that have meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, I'll just look in the textbooks and see what we know about this now. And I imagine we know this and this and this and this, and the pieces of it, and realize they're all missing. They're not there. Nobody's ever done it. We can record the sound that's coming out of your mouth, and we know that that goes to the ear of the listener, and that the inner ear does something to that sound and converts it into nerve cell signals,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't understand where that goes. We don't understand where that goes in your brain in order for you to understand the words that are being spoken.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't have the intervening pieces. And the reason we don't is because, first of all, it's too difficult to admit that we don't have those pieces, and they're impossible to get.
Hmm.
Now that was a shock to me.
Yeah.
I thought all these pieces form a coherent understanding of speech and audition, and there is no such thing.
Hmm.
And the pieces, I mean, you can record the sounds coming out of the mouth, and we know a lot about the organs in the vocal tract and what they do, but that's it.
Yeah. This might be slightly unrelated, but could be related. How much does your best friend Ronnie share in your like bafflement of like the contemporary moment, and like how often do you speak on this subject or other similar subjects together to help each other make sense of it?
Well, we talk several times a week. We both share a bafflement about the contemporary world, and both realize that it's now beyond not only our comprehension, but we can't even claim that we understand it anymore. We used to think we understood, we got it.
Mm-hmm.
Ask me anything, I'll tell you. Now, we both feel that the two of us don't understand it. We only understand how rapidly it's changing, how radically it's changing, how dire the direction is, how scary the future looks, and how unstoppable it may be. So we share that much, and we have different stories to illustrate that. But I would say we're on the same page in terms of the basic understanding.
Hmm.
And both of us now are in our 90s, so we have a long life to look back on and can say with some certainty how radically it has changed. We know it's so different than it was when we were younger. And we were living through events that are now, we were living through events when we were in college that are no longer comprehensible to anyone.
Mm-hmm. What register would you say that bafflement is in? Is it like a kind of disillusion bafflement? Is it pessimistic? Is it neutral?
It's, what was the last word, mutual or neutral?
Neutral.
I would say it's more neutral, but I think both of us have discovered that the age we are now at, we've achieved, the longevity we've achieved,
Mm-hmm.
leaves us in a unique position to observe the past and comment on it. And yet, even though we're baffled, it's one of the most exciting intellectual periods in our life.
Really?
It's just wonderfully rich and exciting.
Hmm.
And we never expected that.
Hmm.
And we don't expect anybody much younger to imagine that this is possible for people in their 90s to say this is really exciting. It's awful, but it's very exciting intellectually. It's awful to live through. I don't wish it on anybody. But it's so interesting because we never thought about it. We never gave aging any thought. We didn't want to. It was part of our denial about death. But it's fascinating. The ideas are all so new and interesting.
Hmm.
That's a complete surprise.
Hmm. What are the main things that Ronnie thinks about?
Well, he's much more religious. He's a Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
He thinks about all these things in church terms. And he feels that the church is way behind. They've fallen behind, that their vocabulary is taken from 50 years ago, and that doesn't serve anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The precepts of the Catholic Church, the basic teaching, are no longer valid because they're couched in language that nobody speaks anymore. It's not that it isn't relevant, but it isn't relevant.
Hmm.
And so we're both looking for, we want to see the Catholic Church, both of us want to see it, fulfilling its role as a major spiritual force in the world. But there aren't any anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We can't think of it. Where is the major spiritual force in the world today that will help guide us in because we all have a spiritual side that is hungry, that needs to be nourished, and if we're not, then the only way we can get nourishment is from the arts. And that's not their basic intention. But I think both of us would agree that perhaps the most nourishing spiritual force in our lives now is music.
Hmm.
and that comes as a tremendous surprise.
Hmm. Why a surprise, and why do you think it's music?
Well, there's something about music that is unique to humans, and we all know from experience that music, the experience of music, can touch the deepest nerve, the deepest depths in our spirit.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know how that happens. We just know that it does happen.
Mm-hmm.
We think, Ronnie and I both think of the famous composers and say, oh my God, what they knew, what they put on paper. It's hardly believable that any human being could have grasped this and written it down.
Mm-hmm.
How did that happen?
Hmm.
And aren't we lucky to have performers today who are good enough to create that music live and record it and let us take it in, even though, it's like the color of the flower. We don't know whether you're hearing the same music that I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way of answering the question, do you hear what I hear?
Hmm.
It plays on your soul. I don't know a better word to use. It plays on your soul in a unique way that sometimes language does, sometimes the arts do, but certain pieces of music, certain experiences you've had with music have dipped into your soul.
Hmm.
There's no other word to say. Well, that's not scientific or anything. That's just dodging the question, sort of. But there isn't any other way to explain it. But music has some property about it. Why should the human brain even hear music as music?
Mm-hmm.
But we do.
Mm-hmm.
We know when something is just sound, and we know when it's music.
Hmm.
It's amazing. I use the term miraculous because both speech and music are miraculous. Both are completely not understood. But music has a quality and a power that even speech can't achieve.
Hmm.
That's amazing.
Hmm.
Music can move you emotionally into a different world
Hmm.
than when you started listening.
Hmm. Well, I find the fact that both you and Ronnie turned to music quite interesting, and I'm curious about the implication of both of those turns, or like the respective implications of each. And I wonder, does Ronnie's turning to music imply that the lack of contemporary language that reflects the Catholic faith um, mean that Ronnie has sort of fallen from his own religious practice or faith? And on the other hand, does your turning to music imply that you once tried to express your spiritual side, as you characterize it, in something like the Catholic faith, but is instead turned to music in place of it?
I think we both find that music has a unique role to play. It is nourishing something or other.
Mm-hmm.
And we both came to that same realization along very different paths.
Mm-hmm.
Ronnie never studied music. I studied several instruments. But music, there was a reason I studied instruments. There was a reason he didn't, but we both have been gravitating towards music with a hunger.
Hmm.
There's nothing else no other word I can use to describe it.
Hmm.
In parallel, we like some of the same composers of classical music, but the heroes of our, I think we would agree with what George Steiner once said, the justification for our civilization is that we've had a Brahms, a Bach, a Stravinsky. That justifies our civilization.
Hmm. Hmm.
And Bach and Brahms and Stravinsky stir us in completely different ways. Their music doesn't sound alike.
Hmm.
And yet, under the right circumstances, all three of those composers can reach right into us and take control.
Hmm. Besides Ronnie, who would you say has been one of the most like informative people in your life?
That's a harder question to answer, and I don't know right off what to tell you.
Mm-hmm.
I was basically a sole practitioner.
Hmm.
I had students, but I basically was never part of a larger group of people doing what I'm doing.
Hmm.
So I had some influential professors when I was an undergraduate, but after graduate school, I think that basically fell away.
Mm-hmm.
If I give that more thought, I might be able to give you a better answer.
Hmm. Okay. Hmm. I guess I asked that mainly because I was thinking about the like high position that role that music plays in your life,
Yes.
and I was thinking about what that would be for me, and music would definitely be high up there, but I'd definitely place some relationships I've had with friends or otherwise, uh, perhaps even higher, just in terms of like, um, I don't know, just how much excitement it gave to my life and how much narrative and how much purpose. And I don't know, do you find that you ever achieve like a height in any kind of personal relationship that you look back on with any fondness or, I don't know, any sort of reflective tone?
No, I don't think so in the terms that you're outlining.
Mm.
You've had your own experience,
Mm-hmm.
profound but different.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say, oh yes, I get it.
Hmm.
I'm with you on that.
Hmm.
Nor did my friend Ronnie. The main influence on his life was his wife,
Mm-hmm.
and he's written about that. She was a Jew. He was a Catholic. That made for an interesting combination.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they both had strong religious convictions, but I don't think that was the basis of their marriage.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't given that so much thought.
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't think he had a mentor in the sense that you're talking about,
Hmm.
nor did I.
I see. What kind of terms do you think you'd use in place of the ones I said to think about? The same question, if any.
Can you rephrase that?
Yeah, you said that you wouldn't assign any kind of profundity to a past relationship that brought the sort of feeling of a spiritual mentorship. And I'm just wondering if you just thought about relationships in a different light or category or with different words.
I'd have to think about that. I don't automatically respond to that question with a useful answer.
Well, maybe one last question to ask is about something material, which is what do you think of Nathan's oncoming marriage?
I'm very happy about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's right for him and Michelle. And I think they've taken the right slow steps along the path to know what they're doing. I can't guarantee they'll be successful, but I don't have any misgivings about that choice. I of course like both of them very much. Michelle is a complete surprise and delight, but she's Michelle, and I've never met anybody like her.
Mm-hmm.
So when they told me they had decided to get married, I was just immediately delighted and happy. I can't say that about any other couple I know of.
Really?
Well, we've all witnessed what seemed like good relationships that didn't work out for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
And we had some premonition of that. We knew that there was some piece, maybe unconsciously, we worried that there was some piece missing. And I don't know many people individually who I think automatically qualify as a good husband or wife.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't come with that territory.
Yeah.
So it's very surprising to have this attitude about Nathan and Michelle, because I never really thought about it that much before he made the announcement to me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't normally think along those lines. You see people's problems more easily than you see their achievements and their wisdom. But I don't have any lingering misgivings at all. I may be wrong. We'll see. There's no guarantee of success. These are very complex relationships. Very complex. And nobody understands them. Maybe a novelist has a grasp, but I don't. So it's just an intuitive response to Nathan's announcement.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you on the next one, huh?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
It's episode 2.
Yeah. Thanks, Andre. That was very interesting. You always ask the right questions.